You're on the ride with the progress. The Hillsong Express. Oh yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Deep Sea Podcast, Pressurized, a short, punchy version of our main feed that gets right to the scientific point. If you like what you hear and you'd like to hear the full episode, you can find it in the same feed. And now, to get right to the point.
I'm going to talk about aquariums as a total tangent, just because I've got hold of the mic. Has nothing to do with deep sea, of course. Like, that would be crazy if anyone kept a deep sea animal in an aquarium. A little bit of interesting history about keeping aquatic animals, basically. The Sumerians first kept fish in artificial ponds 4,500 years ago. So ages ago. Ancient Egyptians as well quite liked a bit of fish keeping. And a lot of these things sort of started off as keeping food fish alive and fresh. So basically putting live food fish in the fountains, keeping them for when you want to eat them, like lobsters in tanks. But due to human nature, and again, same as the lobsters in tanks, you often see a news story. Somebody finds one that's an interesting color or a little bit bigger or sort of unusual in some other way, like these blue lobsters that keep turning up, and they just can't bring themselves to eat it. And so they ended up keeping them basically as pets. And that was the sort of transition into sort of keeping an aquarium and aquatic animals as pets just for the enjoyment of it. Chinese were likely the first to successfully breed fish. And again, that was carp for food. But then Japan later selectively bred those carp, and we got goldfish and koi, two species of fish that we synonymize with sort of being pets, basically.
So are goldfish not natural then?
No, a type of carp.
Oh.
They're not even gold.
Disappointed.
They're kind of a coppery brown. It's a recessive trait as well. If you don't keep them nicely bred, they all go brown, and like 1 in 10 is gold.
Oh, there you go. I didn't know that.
Goldfish bowls were present in England in the 1700s, but nothing more complex because we hadn't yet figured out oxygen and nutrient cycling. So I think goldfish were very briefly kept in bowls in the 1700s. So it was all a bit of fun at first, like more fish and aquatic things as decoration, but it was actually great for biology. It gave us a chance to observe some natural behavior. And it was sort of publicly entertaining as well. So the first display aquarium was open to the public in 1853 in Regent's Park in London, so here in the UK, but spread around the world. P.T. Barnum even got in on the act. He had an aquarium as well in New York. The Germans were very into their tropical fish. They were the first to sort of start bringing tropical fish back. And that was sort of in these wooden ships making month-long passages. And they were kept in metal tanks with a candle under them to bring the temperature up.
Nice.
So that was it. Only the very hardy ones made it back. And they didn't realize at the time, but a lot of them tended to be the air-breathing ones because the water gets so horrible. But again, we were sort of still figuring out the nitrogen cycle and how not to make fish die. But as things got more and more exotic, we knew less and less about how to keep them alive.
Deep sea.
Yeah. Can we keep deep sea animals?
Wasn't it like a giant isopod that didn't eat for like 10 years?
5 years, yep.
5 years, was it?
So yeah, they have been kept alive, the giant isopods, giant Japanese spider crabs. They have been in a few displays now. I think Birmingham Sea Life Centre was one of the first places to have them. Someone may have cracked keeping at least some deep sea species in the aquarium and have learned a great deal in doing it and gone through a lot of the things I've highlighted here where you just have to figure out how to artificially recreate what these animals need. And in doing that, you learn a lot about them as well. You know, you realize what is the triggers to reproduction, what is important to them, and it revealed a great deal. So lucky enough to chat with aquarists from the Monterey Bay Aquarium who have recently launched their Into the Deep exhibition, including many species of deep sea animals that have never been held in captivity before and on public display. So the general public can experience a bit of the deep sea firsthand.
I'm lucky enough to be joined by some of the team from the Monterey Bay Aquarium to talk about their recently opened exhibit, Into the Deep. There is something very special and unique about this exhibit, but rather than spoil it sort of myself, Brian, could you just give us an overview of the exhibit and what makes it special?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Into the Deep, it's a brand new exhibit. And yeah, it's all about the deep sea. So we're showing animals from the deep sea, describing it as a threatened and a rarely seen environment. And we're trying to give a window into that world. We're leveraging our relationship with our research partner, Mbari, for this exhibit. So we're working with Mbari on all of our collections of all the live animals, not all, but many of the collections, and to show folks about the tech and the research that goes on in the deep sea.
That's the exciting part there. You have live exhibits. You are displaying deep sea animals alive. And one of the big sort of cruxes of the show is the misrepresentation of the deep sea and its wildlife. And you cannot misrepresent something when there it is alive in front of you. Really loving that this is giving the general public access to the deep sea, which has been quite an exclusive space. It's now for everybody because it is everybody's. So we've got a bit of a team actually on the call now because this is a monumental task and it took a lot of skills coming together in order to do it. Could you just all introduce yourselves basically and overview your technical speciality within this exhibit?
I'm Ellen Umeda. I'm one of the aquarists here on the midwater team for this new Into the Deep show. So we are responsible for the exhibit animals that are below the surface, but not on the bottom of the ocean.
And I'm Michelle Kaiser. I'm an aquarist on the benthic team. My team looks after everything that's on the bottom of the ocean, and I personally take care of the deep sea corals.
And my name's Brian Maurer. I'm the manager of life support systems here at the aquarium. So life support systems, it's all the equipment that moves the water around and conditions it and keeps it nice and healthy for the animals. On this exhibit, my team and I designed the life support systems, and now we're operating and maintaining them.
Really exciting stuff. So let's get to the real celebrities here. What is the lineup? What animals are you bringing to the public? Many are for the first time, and there are some that even are new to science.
For the midwater, we have a lot of animals that we're displaying that have been displayed at other aquariums, but we also have some really cool new animals that we've collected with Mbari that haven't been displayed. Things like the bloody belly comb jelly, the nanomia, the common siphonophore, even some new discoveries like Red X, this little cytipid that's red and actually hasn't even been described or named yet. So,
hence the sort of cool X-Man name.
Yeah. So, just a variety of animals. And then also some animals like Pelagia flaviolas, tiny little nettle that other aquariums have displayed before, but it's really cool to see those as well.
And then on the benthic side, we have a bunch of really cool iconic sort of species like the Japanese spider crabs or the deep sea lumpfish. And then in terms of really neat local stuff we've collected, we have some really interesting snailfish that we've never really worked with before, both Japanese and local. We have some eel pouts, which are really creepy and weird, that we only recently had success with. We have the bubblegum corals, which I don't think have been displayed in any aquarium. That took us a long time to figure out how to keep those alive and feeding. And we have some basket stars and bone worms, which are pretty incredible, and giant isopods.
Brilliant stuff. That's a good celebrity list from Deep Sea Critters. This has been a massive undertaking, and you sort of allude to the difficulties in maintaining some of these animals because there isn't a guidebook. No one has done this before, or at least not with some of these species.
Sometimes it's even like how you collect them is part of the learning curve of how to take care of them.
How did you even get these back alive to start the then difficult task of keeping them alive?
Well, I can speak for both Ellen on the midwater team and our benthic team is that we use the same robot or ROV, and it either has a sort of suction, which Ellen can go into for the jellies, but for the benthic stuff, we use the manipulator arm, which is basically just a giant robot aluminum clasp that you point at something and the pilots pick it up. There's different ways to pick it up. Sometimes we'll use a spatula. We'll have them hold a spatula on the manipulator arm and pick up things like pancakes, like if it's a sea star, or we have like a colander scoop and it's like something you'd see at McDonald's where they like pick up French fries with it.
You've cobbled something together actually on the cruise. I do love seeing that super space age manipulator arm with like a cooking implement at the end of it.
Right? It's like a total
but it does
mix.
the job.
Yeah, it's like super complicated and then zip tying spatula from Target on the end.
We once made a brush to tickle things to make them bioluminesce. And so it's this big impressive arm and then this like little homemade brush at the end for poking the coral.
Totally. There's sometimes we even will take like a kitchen sponge that we'll steal from the galley on the ship and zip tie or like rubber band it onto the end of the manipulator arm if we're going to pick up something like pretty delicate and we don't want the grabbers to like mar the surface of it. And so the pilots are always like, oh yeah, the galley guys get mad because we steal all their sponges.
Once you've sort of got those critters in the bio box, how were you sort of recovering them and maintaining them on vessels?
I'd say that's the most stressful part.
That's the big environment change. That's what's going to kill something quick, I guess.
Well, first of all, I would start at like pretty much throwing away everything you would assume you would know about this animal. And just, you know, if it's a coral, just don't even think about any tropical corals you've ever taken care of. And then in terms of getting it in the bio box and getting it up, one of the things that I always think of is like, this animal's never seen the light of day. Like, how would you feel if someone picked you up in a pitch black environment and thrust you to the surface and then opened the drawer and there's sunlight? And, to these animals, they've never adapted or evolved to take in that amount of sunlight. We've been trying to shield the light on top of the bio box with like stuff you would use to make like a box to develop film in.
Oh, we tinkered with some old film developing stuff. We were trying to preserve eyes, basically.
Yeah.
And of course, we didn't want to bleach the pigments. So we used a lot of film canister stuff because there was all these clever things that would close, but the opening wouldn't allow light in and things like that. So yeah, we were messing around with some weird tech there.
Totally. Yeah. And yeah, you basically just have to think super outside the box. So on my end, yeah, we experimented a lot with shielding light from collection drawer to ice chest that you put these animals in. And that seemed to help a lot with a lot of the R&D. So that was a good first step.
That's interesting. So you found light as the biggest hurdle. They really were damaged by it or stressed at least.
I think stress would be a better word. It could be that we got better at the husbandry on the other end of things when they got here, but it seemed to be a better jumping off point. They weren't already stressed. They weren't burned, I would say, already.
Yeah, because they're never going to experience UV light. Their DNA is probably quite vulnerable to getting blasted with sunlight.
Right, exactly. So that was a good first step for the benthic team.
Were you maintaining any sort of pressure, or was it more about giving a cold environment? Because the two sort of play together.
The only thing we thought about was the cold, and that changed for if we were or are collecting anything with a swim bladder. So something that maintains its buoyancy. And the way we sort of mitigate that is by doing a mini little safety stop like you would do on a scuba dive and just sort of stop halfway between our bottom depth and our ROV recovery and just kind of hang out for a little bit. Maybe that could be 20 minutes. That seemed to help a little bit.
And it's amazing that it's the diver answer. It's the deco stop that seems to have made a real difference.
Totally. One of the cool things we sort of anecdotally figured out about the benthic animals is kind of going into it. We all thought these animals need really long periods of hard sheets of laminar flow, just sort of drifting over them. And we learned pretty quickly that is not the case. In fact, it was quite the opposite for a lot of the really delicate animals, which now that I say that they're delicate sounds pretty straightforward. Don't blast them with flow. But, when you see them on the bottom of the ocean, they're basically poised in a way it looks like they've been sprayed with a garden hose.
Yeah.
In one direction.
They look like a tree that's grown on a sort of windy bank. It's sort of, I can tell which way the wind blows by which way you're leaning.
Exactly. And then we get them in the tank, we turn up the flow and they don't really do so hot. So it was kind of the opposite, especially with like the persingid stars or like the corals. Like once we dialed everything down to opposite of what they get in the wild under pressure, they did great. I don't know the physics behind it. I don't know anything other than it was just opposite. And so I can't help but wonder if the pressure sort of mitigates that. I can say for the corals, the flow was huge. Like we had so many corals that just never came out. Their polyps never came out and they wouldn't eat and they would not thrive. And it was like, okay, throw more flow at them. And it's hard for when you're comparing it to tropical corals because they eat light. It's the same if you're taking care of like a gorgonian. Basically, they have to physically eat food too. But paired with the fact that they can't photosynthesize and just don't know how to get them to eat is like...
And there's such a time lag. An upset coral stays upset for quite some time. So even when you get everything right, you don't get that confirmation and feedback for a while because they sulk. Right. They sulk for a long time.
And I'm sure like a deep sea coral compared to a tropical coral, the feedback time is even slower.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Any other tricky ones?
So for the midwater animals, it's a little similar to what Michelle was talking about. We do use the remotely operated vehicles or the ROVs that MBARI has. We use the suction sampler, kind of turn up that flow and then suck that animal slowly down this tube and into a set of collection containers in the bottom of the ROV. So that's one way that we get animals. And it tends to be for animals that are a little bit more hardy and won't just fall apart at the touch of anything. And actually, we have another method too on the ROV that's even better for not touching the animals. We call them detritus samplers. I guess clear cylinders, and they've got sort of a lid on the top and a lid on the bottom, and they're both open. And the ROV pilots at MBARI are amazing. I don't know how they do it. It's kind of like a video game, I think, for them. But they essentially just take this massive ROV in the container in the front and then just like prop it right over the animal or the jelly that we want. And then when it's right in the center of this tube, they just quickly shut the doors and they don't even touch the animal. ROV pilots are very talented and that they're able to do that.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because you get all focused on the instrument and you're sort of super zoomed in, but they're essentially moving like a transit van behind that camera.
Yeah.
With a time delay in three-dimensional space while maintaining awareness of everything else going on. Because I'm too myopic. I'd zoom right in, but they're incredibly skilled. It's amazing to watch.
Yeah. Because a lot of our animals are vertical migrators, during the day they're living at deeper depths, but at night they come to the surface and they're in the shallower depths just because there's less predators and more food available. We actually have been able to do some night boating just in Monterey Bay. So at night, we'll just take one of the boats near the Monterey Canyon. Usually we get Nanomia bejuga, which is known as the common siphonophore, but a lot of times they come to the surface at night. We see them a lot on the ROV dives, but you can also get them at the surface. We'll go out there and see them, just scoop them up and bring them back.
And they're pre-adapted to that migration. So you can bring them up and they survive at surface waters, even though they are only visitors.
Yes, definitely. They're well adapted to changing conditions. So it really helps us in a lot of ways. A third method that we've been collecting, just probably within the last couple of years, actually, our team will go out to Hawaii and do some blackwater diving. A lot of these animals are vertical migrators, so they're coming to the surface at night, and you can just scuba dive and collect these animals.
Once you got them back to the aquarium, did you have to maintain that migration? Do they try and do it in the aquarium?
We don't really maintain that migration. We usually just pick something. So if we're like, oh, they're at the surface, well, we won't change the water quality parameters too much. We'll just kind of leave it just because it's also easier on our part. If you have a common siphonophore that can live in a lower oxygen zone, we can put them at that. But if they can just be in the regular surface oxygen level, then it's kind of silly to have to change those conditions and make extra work for yourself.
It's like a shared office. Like if there's a temperature everyone can agree on, then why show off the fact you can live with hardly any oxygen?
Yeah. Why put that extra effort into it?
Have you noticed any changes in behavior with the light as you get visitors? When the lights come on in the aquarium, are you noticing like they try and head towards the top?
Lighting has definitely been a concern for us. And if you walk around the exhibit, you'll notice there are a lot of no camera flashes, but I think, a lot of these animals that we've been able to display, they can handle some light. Specifically for midwater animals, a lot of time is that sudden change in light. And the common siphonophores, whenever you just like flash a light on them, you can see they respond. They just dash away. And that's a concern because sometimes they start to lose their little nectaphores or they start to just kind of crumble and
bits drop off when they get stressed, don't they?
Bits drop off. And, obviously we're trying to keep these animals 100% intact. So when bits start dropping up, you're like, oh gosh, no.
Yeah. It doesn't look like it's promo shot anymore.
No, it doesn't. But they can regrow it. And we have seen some regrowth in some of our animals, but we just try to avoid that in general. Just don't flash them with light.
You guys are mentioning changing the parameters and adjusting things like that. I think it's Brian that falls to, isn't it? You're behind the scenes making these things happen.
Yeah, definitely.
What are some of the hurdles that you had to overcome technologically?
The main thing was the low oxygen systems, and that's where most of our work has been over the years. Figuring out a way to maintain those very, very low oxygen levels that some of the animals require, not all of them, but some of them, and doing that in like a recirculated system that we can feed and that we can maintain. And we've been working on that for 5 or 6 years. We had a little R&D system up in our wet lab, playing around with different technologies and landed on these gas transfer membranes to remove oxygen from the seawater. We've had low oxygen systems in the past year at the aquarium. We had a deep sea show about 20 years ago, but at that time we were bubbling in nitrogen and using nitrogen to displace the oxygen in the seawater and pretty much push it out of solution and out the top of these reaction chambers. But what that left behind was a bunch of little nitrogen bubbles. And many of the animals can be really damaged by those. So this time around, decided early on that we can't accept these micro bubbles. We got to figure out a different way to do it. So we played around with these gas transfer membranes. And essentially, these are contact chambers with a bunch of little straws. The straws are permeable to gas, but not to water. And so we'll pump seawater through the membranes. And then on the gas side of the membrane, we'll run a nitrogen gas and apply a vacuum. So we create this oxygen deficient, very low pressure environment. And that just makes the oxygen in seawater want to cross that membrane and come out of solution without any gas replacing it.
Is carbon dioxide coming out as well? Any pH that you have to then correct for?
No, you bet. CO2 does come out of solution as well. To compensate for that, we do add CO2 back in through a venturi, basically running seawater through an injector and injecting CO2. But we're doing that for two reasons. These animals also come from a low pH environment. So we're driving the pH down to 7.5, 7.4, essentially whatever the animal needs to correct for that CO2 that's removed in the gas transfer membranes, and just because that's what they need to begin with.
That's really cool. 5-6 year project. And you were starting from a prototype as well, weren't you? So this has been a real sort of R&D project in itself.
You bet. Yeah. We started just with a really small, like 15, 20 gallon system in our wet lab, no animals, getting all the pressures and the flows dialed in, and then built a couple low oxygen holding systems. So scaled up significantly to like 1,000 gallons, and then actually started working with animals in there. And then it was a big give and take back and forth with Michelle and Ellen and on all the aquarists on, exactly what conditions the animals are doing well in. So we ran those holding systems for several years, built a holding system to take on the ship. So out on the cruises, so they can put the animals in this low pH, low oxygen environment, and also very cold right after collection. And then, we scaled it all up significantly and built the exhibit.
Amazing. I do love getting behind the scenes in an aquarium. Everyone loves a protein skimmer, but when it's 2 stories high, that's impressive.
Sure. Yeah, it can be fun to see. I'd say one curveball on that transport system, the mobile system, we designed these systems up to work in a nice, stable, shore-based environment, where everything's, not sloshing around. And then the first time we took the mobile system out there, the sloshing just made it barely work at all. So that was a big learning curve. We needed to make all those columns of water much taller to keep the oxygen from getting back in the water. And now the stakes are pretty high. We've got to keep these animals alive. So we've got tons of redundancy and alarming and doing rounds many, many times per day. If something falls out of range, we get a message to our phones and to the, control software instantaneously and can run down there and hopefully fix it. Another thing that I think is just super cool is how flexible these systems are. Typically, we'll have a show and we'll design, okay, here's the conditions that we need to meet, and we'll build a system to meet that. In this case, early on, it was decided that we don't know what we're going to collect, and these systems have to be able to essentially hit that entire gradient from surface level down to 3% with respect to oxygen saturation, and pH from 8 all the way down to 7.4 and anywhere in between. And then temperature as well, 75 degrees Fahrenheit all the way down to 40 or maybe just a touch colder than that Fahrenheit.
So they're not super bespoke for the animals you have now. There's loads of future scope.
Exactly. And so, it still baffles me, how simple it is to adjust the systems. We've got these touch screens and you just enter, on the touch screen where you want pH, where you want oxygen, where you want temperature. And then all these valves automatically adjust their cycling rates and everything like that and bring the system up to those conditions within a couple of hours. We're more than happy to share with other aquariums, and we're happy to talk to them about everything that we've done. That's one thing that's pretty cool about the aquarium industry, I think, is very collaborative.
Now we have access to these animals. They've been acclimatized. They've got used to their new conditions. They are hopefully showing natural behavior. And so this is a massive opportunity scientifically. We only get glimpses of the deep sea. We visit there. And when we visit in a huge hulking vehicle, we're shining artificial lights. It's not a natural situation. So having access to these animals, hopefully in their natural and relaxed state, have there been any interesting discoveries?
Some of our benthic animals have been gravid lately. We have some sea pens that are about to spawn, and we also have some gravid snailfish, which are going to lay eggs any day. Alicia Batondo, our other coworker aquarist, has raised snailfish from eggs. We're all really excited for the local ones to lay eggs because then we'll have a lot of them. They're really, really cute, pink little snailfish.
And I'd be fascinated to know about the courtship and how involved both the adults are, if there was any parental care. There's a massive variety in the snailfish reproductive strategy, like right up to parasitism. Do you know what this particular species tends to do?
Yeah. So this is in the genus Chiropractus, and These have been known to lay their eggs on the bottom of crab carapaces. We've also had live crabs have snailfish eggs on them. I think the goal is for them to give them a carapace and have them lay eggs in it.
That's really exciting. I'm particularly fascinated by fish reproductive behavior in the deep sea, and it's all inferred currently. It's all looking at body structures and sort of where the animals are found and where they're found when they're gravid and ripe.
Totally.
Your ability to like see a courtship, maybe? That's super, super exciting to me. What about the pelagic stuff?
The bloody belly comb jelly, which is, that jelly that's, looks like comb jelly, but it's bright red. When the light kind of shines on it, it's a little teen rose. It looks like it sparkles. I don't think that would have been possible at all without this low oxygen system. Figuring out the parameters for that, it's been challenging, but now that we have them kind of figured out, it's just been really cool to be able to display those animals. And I think another favorite of mine is the paper lantern jelly, Pandea rubra. We see small ones, we see big ones, bigger ones kind of the size of a tennis ball, softball. And those are really cool too. But we wouldn't be able to display those without low oxygen either. And then Michelle kind of touched on culturing and spawning. Our team's been able to spawn some of the animals that come to the surface, live in sort of ambient seawater conditions, like the common siphonophore that I was talking about earlier. We've been able to spawn some of those and get little tiny babies. Pelagia flaviola, the mauve stinger, which were collected on blackwater dives in Hawaii. We're actually on the, F2 generation right now. So when you actually go to the exhibit, you won't actually see the ones that we collected in Hawaii. You'll actually see their offspring. Being able to culture a lot of these animals kind of relieves this need to collect. If you can just raise them in house, that's even better. And you get to learn about their life cycles.
And rule out any sort of collection stress to that generation. Or that generation is fully acclimatized and has lived within your system. There hasn't been that sort of collection event. So that's brilliant. You're on the second generation already.
Yeah.
Feeding was an issue as well, wasn't there? You had to develop some new methods to actually deliver food and get these things to eat.
Since we're working with pelagic animals, they're eating a lot of pelagic foods. When we go collecting, we're not scooping for deep sea copepods and plankton. So we actually culture a lot of copepods in-house. We've been culturing those and then feeding those out to a lot of our animals because some of these are medusivores, meaning they eat other jellies. We have to culture other jellies to feed them. So that could be moon jellies or Bolenopsis, which is a comb jelly, culturing those just to feed our animals. So we're culturing more jellies to feed our jellies. And then we also get mysids and some really tiny larval fish. And those will actually target feed. So as these animals are coming to the surface in their tanks, we'll just take like a tiny pipette and just baste a little fish between their lobes and then they close it up and they eat it. So that's a very tedious task. I'll say that. That's what it is for the midwater animals. I know it's different for the benthic animals, and I'm sure Michelle can speak on that.
If I'm not schlepping out to do a plankton tow to get some plankton to feed to the corals, we're just doing a lot of broadcasting of either fresh or frozen copepods or rotifers for the filter feeders. But there is some stuff like the Brisingid stars. We have a species that's undescribed and actually only does well in Brian's low O2 system. And that exhibit is pretty much sealed. There's a lid with a boat hatch that has a seal around it, so it's not exposed to the surface. And so feeding that all day and making sure it has food is kind of funny. We ended up taking a little thermos basically and drilling a hole in it and putting an air stone in it to keep the food circulated, which is a bunch of different frozen copepods and algae, and then hooking that up to a dosing pump that is sealed into the lid of the tank. And so that has basically allowed us to keep the O2 low and the food constantly present, which is the only way we've gotten them to survive. So that's kind of the one weird way we feed our animals in the benthic side.
Yeah, you can't just pop open the lid
no.
and put some fish flakes in.
Right.
Not only have you overcome all this stuff, this is now sharing the deep sea with the public. We spoke on the last episode about live streaming dives and how the deep sea is becoming accessible to the general public and how we want them to care about it because maybe more than any other habitat, it's kind of our shared heritage. So when did the exhibit open and have you found it? Have you seen people responding to these things?
It's been really rewarding walking around and watching people look at them but watching people's reactions to these animals they've never even heard of or thought existed is pretty fabulous.
I'll include some links in the show notes so anyone listening can scroll down and there'll be links to the social media to follow. And thank you so much for granting me a little bit of time. I feel like I know so much more about it now and I'm only more excited because of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was a pressurized version of one of our longer episodes. If you enjoyed that and you would like to hear the full length episode, just match the episode numbers and you'll be able to find the full length version in the feed. Thanks for listening. We'll deep see you next time and I abyss you already.